So before we get started, I'd like to start us out with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing us here all safely. Thank you for waking us up this morning and starting us on our way. Please bless today's lesson. Allow me to step aside and your word to come forth. Um, Continue to bless us, bless this lesson, allow it to bless our hearts and remain in our spirits as we go through it, as well as after we leave. Your son Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. So I will try to figure out what topic of conversation I start from for today's Sunday school lesson. But I was going to ask, well, then it came to me, I'm like, well, has anyone seen the fact that the nation is on strike? Well, not the whole nation, right? But we got different industries. Yeah, Hollywood on strike. I think up in the Midwest, we got GM, they on strike because they want more money as well. People that's making the cars, basically. Uh, yeah, the cost of living is going up, right? And so, with that being said, it's like, I don't know. It's just one of those things because like if you read through history, you look through or you remember back to history class in school. I don't remember what grade it was taught in. Maybe sometime middle school, elementary school. Not sure, but essentially, it's not the first time America has had its workers go on strike because the cost of living is going up. The CEOs or the wealthy, quote unquote, are hoarding the money, right? Think about the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and back in the steel days. Back then, people would go on strike because of the unfair work conditions or working too many hours, things like that. Basically, and it's funny because like here we are in 2023, and we're seeing the same things go on. And I'm sure there was strikes probably back previously as well. I mean, UPS strikers went on strike, workers went on strike. There's always a threat for a railroad strike. Um, and it seems about just about every industry has that idea of strike, right? Where they refuse to work because this stuff is not fair no more. Um, and the reason I wanted to bring that up in today's lesson is because it brings up that idea of things go in cycles, right? Um, the text really talks about, really, if you look through history, not only because I talk about America and our workforce going on strikes and our own cycles, but if you look through history, you'll see kingdoms, they rise, they also fall, right? Empires, governments, all the same thing, right? Egypt, they went from being ran by the pharaohs to being taken over, then running themselves again, then being taken over. Same with the Israelites, ran themselves, was taken over, slave free, slave free. And this happens for every nation, every civilization. They all rise, they all fall. Eventually, one day, probably American civilization will, not civilization, but the American way of doing things may come to an end too. I don't know. There's always that threat of, oh, what if World War III comes out, right? What if China and Russia joins together and comes against the U.S. and I don't know. There's a lot of propaganda out there. But essentially, what I'm saying is this is the idea of patterns, and we all know the economy itself also follows a pattern, right? We'll go through probably 10 years or so of economic growth, then every like 2 or 3 years of recession. All right, remember '08 recession hit, 2021 recession hit. 10 years of growth, hit recession for about 2 years. Then now they're saying, oh, it might be another recession coming. We might be growing. We don't know. It's again cycles. Life goes in cycles, right? That's what we always hear. And if you look in Galatians 6:7, it says, whatever a man reapeth, the man also sows, right? That's a old, it's scripture actually. So it's from the text that it's something that we all know, something we've all experienced in life. We've seen someone, quote unquote, get what they had coming to them because they reap what they sow, things like that. It's interesting because this lesson actually made me realize that the same is true today. But if you think about it, it's not just about what a man does. Sometimes what a nation does as well, right? A nation will reap what it sows, same way a man does. The children of Israel, whenever they are praising God, they all of a sudden they get freed, right? They're no longer captive. They are able to live how they want to as long as they are following the laws and statutes and commandments that are within the Mosaic law. But also if they start falling, backsliding, as some church folks say, right? Then you will see, okay, now they're back in slavery. They're back in bondage because they wasn't following the law, statute, and commandments of the Mosaic law. And so it's one of those things like the children of Israel, again, they also something that we always see. They hard-headed. They go in cycles. They free, they not free. They free, they not free, right? And that eventually brings us out into today's lesson, right? But today, well, before I get into that, what I did want to say is the principle of today's lesson is to show that God cares for his people and delivers them through leaders who act in his strength and application. And today's lesson has the application of establishing that God provides the leaders we need as well as the strength those leaders need in order to help us. And so, what today's lesson, we're actually coming out of the Old Testament once again, but this time we're coming out with, I don't know how to pronounce it, to be honest. It might be Ehud, but I'm going to say Ehud. Maybe Ehud sounds better. I don't know. Yeah, Ehud. Ehud. Okay. And so, coming out, we're looking at Ehud, right? And we're actually coming out of Judges 3, chapter 15. Well, chapter 3, verse 15 through 25, as well as verse 29 through 30. And it has the lesson, Ehud frees Israel. So that lets us know Israel just been in slavery, and now we looking at them trying to get freed, right? Because again, they're in that cycle. They're in that cycle. We always are in cycles. So I will actually read the text to get us started here. Oh, 1 second. I need to take this jacket off. It's getting a little warm. It was cool this morning. No, I don't want the fan. I'm okay. I appreciate it. All right. Oh yeah, chapter 3, 15. Yeah, okay. And I'm reading mine off the NIV version just because it comes across a little. It's easier to say than the King James, my opinion. With modern English, right? So it says again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Jerah, the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, the king of Moab. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, so it's 18 inches or so, right? It's a foot and a half for everyone else. Which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented a tribute to Eglon, the king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on the way those who carried it. But on reaching the stone's images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you." The king said to his attendants, "Leave us," and they all left. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and a fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, "He must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace." They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their Lord falling to the floor dead. Then it jumps over to verse 29, and it says, 28. No, it is 29. Yeah, verse 29, it says, "At that time they struck them down, about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong, not one escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. So a lot actually transpired. It's actually very, very action packed. I always enjoy reading the Old Testament because it be a thriller almost, right? I can almost see a movie in my head whenever I read it. And so when we first start reading the actual text, what we see is that, if we have, I guess, read a little bit earlier in the verse 15, we would see that at the beginning of chapter 3, the Israelites were they were captured, right? And they were delivered by Othniel, and they had peace for 40 years. Now they have been, in verse 12, it said, okay, then it's the Israelites were doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. They stopped following, so they hit that cycle of not doing what they're supposed to do. And when they hit that, they were then in slavery for another 18 years, right? And then they cried out to the Lord, and Ehud was rose up. So that was 40 years previously. Um, and my question I did want to start with you all is, what is 40 years, or what is the significance of 40 years? Like, can we think of I guess, a significant event that takes place over a 40 years time? Yeah, it took them 40 years to get to the promised land. That's actually correct. 40 years. Yeah, because I know the rain 40 days, 40 nights. So 40 is used a lot in the Bible as well. Um, but the point that I'm actually getting at here is the significance of 40 years is it really essentially means there's an entire generation, right? If you think about the time people work, right? Well, people work, you work for more than 40 years until you're retired, right? But you look at me, I got probably 40 years until I hit the quote unquote retirement age by the U.S. government to be able to stop working and somehow get a living, right? But essentially, a lot can happen in 40 years. Generations happen in 40 years. That's an entire generation, right? You look back 40 years ago, I wasn't here, a lot. This room probably this building definitely wasn't here 40 years ago. It's an entire generation. And the reason I'm, I guess, landing on the point that's an entire generation is the way we do things now compared to how we did things 40 years ago is completely different, right? 40 years ago, internet was only probably, actually, was it, let's see, created? I don't even think it was created. If it was very in its infancy, essentially. Same thing 40 years from now, we all might not be driving cars. We don't know, right? 40 years is enough time for things to happen that life can, the unthinkable can happen, I can say, right? And essentially, in 40 years' time, a lot of times what happened is that the Israelites will go from praising, worshiping, being very religious. Then they have kids. Then those kids never seen the miracles done by that happened to their parents, and so they forget everything because it's not passed down. And because it's not passed down, that's when the cycle is going to then begin again, right? It's the basically my significance to 40 years is the idea of forgetting. Um, and so really after they forgot, and they had just the kids had been doing, I guess, just doing what they thought was best at the time, right? Because they hadn't seen what was the correct way of doing something, of worshiping God, following the rules, the laws, and everything in the Mosaic law, that is. Um, they finally cried out for God's help, right? Um, and I had a question about why is it that people will not take God at His word and stay right with Him? Because we see it clearly in our Bible that there's a clear conversation between God and His people when the covenant is accepted, the Mosaic law is accepted, saying, "These are my rules. We all follow them. You follow them, I got y'all." Essentially, y'all don't follow them, stuff will happen. It's very clear, but people don't follow them. Why? That's because it's human nature, for people to, I guess, fall into sin. People start doing what they want. We do have free will, even though we may know all the rules and laws. We don't have to follow them. I mean, we should, but it's not a God isn't saying do this or else. I mean, He is saying that, but essentially what I'm saying is we have that option of choice still. Is what I'm trying to say. Right. Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. And as you have it written down here, that it's one of those things where it's like, if it's real easy, like the idea of us forgetting, it's real easy for us to say, "Oh, this is wrong, this is wrong," telling someone else what's wrong, right? But who is it hardest to tell that something is wrong? Exactly, yourself. I be trying to outsmart myself so many times. It's not possible though. I try to do it. I try to outsmart myself, but I can never do it. And it's like almost like telling a kid, "Oh no, you can't have no candy before dinner, right? Why? Cause you gonna spoil your supper." Then here you come. It's 5 o'clock. You know dinner ain't gonna be done till about 6:37. What you end up doing? You might crack open a bag of chips. Why? Because you too hungry. Even though you just said the same thing to a child and said, "Don't eat nothing because this is coming." You will quickly forget that. When it comes to yourself, you just instantly forget it. It's just funny. At least I find it funny. But the same way that we forget something so small, the Israelites continue to forget something so big, right? The idea of who it is they're supposed to worship and how they're supposed to do so, what it is they're supposed to do, who they're supposed to marry, love, and things like that. Because back then, that idea of marrying someone from another nation didn't, I guess it in today's time doesn't seem so crazy, right? But it is when that entire nation doesn't believe in the same God that you believe in, and unequally yoked marriages. Now the kids don't know. It's a lot that can come of that, right? And that's what was happening within this time in the Old Testament. And so it's like sometimes our own wisdom stops at us, and we become our own enemy. And so as we start through, I know I sound like I'm rambling, but I'm actually getting to the point of the text. As we start reading it, we see in verse 15, it says Ehud was a left-handed guy, right? A left-handed man. This may seem very, it's like, why is that in here? Right? You don't never mention who anybody else left-handed, right-handed. You really don't mention it. Why are you even saying this, right? And initially it may seem like a very small detail, or to the untrained eye is what I'll say. It can seem like a very a small detail. Shoot, it seemed small to me until I kept reading. I'm like, oh, and then it's like, things start taking place. But essentially, it's like, it may seem like a small detail, but that small detail changed the trajectory of the entire story. So think of a left-handed boxer, or a left-handed hitter in baseball, or a left-handed pitcher in baseball, right? It throws everyone off their game because they've only trained and practiced with a right-handed person, because most people are right-handed. It's almost just thinking of the thing that you didn't expect to come. Let me see. I think I'm gonna continue to keep talking about the left-handed stuff. I'll leave it there. So essentially, it can throw you off your entire game, right? And I'll come back to speak more about the left-handed stuff a little later here. I'm trying to keep following this, but also a little bit more about Ehud was, I guess it didn't really say here. It just said he was a man, and he was a son of Jerah the Benjamite. But the thing is that Ehud was also very well respected in the Israelite community. He was that guy, right? He was a public figure. He was almost a celebrity of that day, if you think about it. Well respected in his community, and his name held weight. And because of his status, he had to be the one that had to deliver the tax to the Moabite king. It wasn't because he was the tax collector or he was the banker or any of those things. No, it was just because of who he was. That's why he had to deliver it. And if you are taking over a nation, why is it that you want someone of high status delivering the taxes to you? This is a question for the class, not Miss Sharon, though. If anyone can think of why you would want someone very popular to deliver something to you that you are now in charge of. If you take over a kingdom, you're a king, right? You take over a kingdom. Why is it that you want someone in that kingdom who is very popular to deliver your taxes and everything? It's along those lines, but essentially, if you think about it, if I'm a king and I'm looking at a way to humiliate the people I am now over, the way I can do that is I'm the person that they revere. I'm going to make him seem like he's less than, which will make the people in turn feel like they are much more less than, right? So think about it. If, oh man, I can't even think of a great example because I'm like, who is very well respected? I ain't gonna get into that conversation. But essentially, that's what it strokes the ego of the person that's in power to say, oh, I got your king, who was your king essentially. Now he's over here giving me taxes. He's paying me money, right? It's gonna make that king feel like he's less than because he's giving over power that he normally didn't have to do, and also, his people is like, dang, if he can make him do it, he the most powerful God of all us. What can we do to ever stand up and go against this person, right? So it's one of those. It's a mental game if you think about it. It's a mental game of chess. I'll say so. The text goes into more detail about yeah, it was because of Ehud's status. That's why he was the one that was delivering all the taxes over, and because it made Egal feel more powerful, putting another leader to work essentially. But the text goes into more detail about the significance of Ehud being left-handed, and left-handed people in the Bible. Being left-handed, it gives you a skill. I talked about how it can make the enemy unsuspecting of you, right? But it also can give you a skill. Just because typically when you are left-handed, but you grow up in a world where everything is right-handed, you have to naturally learn to do both. So the tribe of Benjamin, they actually are known for having a lot of left-handed people. Why? I don't know why they had a lot of left-handed people. It didn't really say. I could have looked more into it. I just didn't. But essentially, they had a lot of left-handed people, which I know in another time in the Bible actually showed that them having left-handed soldiers allow their soldiers to shoot bow and arrows from the left-hand side of the horse as well as the right-hand side of the horse. Basically, they're ambidextrous now because they use both their left-hand side in training and their right-hand side. If their enemy is a right-handed person, don't know how to defend themselves against someone left-handed, they now have a natural advantage over them. It just makes them stronger. In the case of Ehud, though, the reason it was called out because he wasn't known to be a warrior or fighter or anything like that. The reason the significance of him being left-handed is because if anyone is concealed carrying a weapon, right, typically they're going to carry it on their left side. If I'm a right-handed person, I'm going to carry it on my left side. Why? Because I can draw it. Like, I think when drawing a sword, drawing a pistol, drawing whatever weapon it is I'm trying to attack someone, I'm drawing it from the opposite side because it's easier. I have access to it. If it's here, I got to come all the way up here if it's a sword to get it out. You see what I'm saying? But if it's here, it's a much faster draw. And those seconds in close quarters combat can be the difference between life and death, right? And also, if I'm a guard, right, I'm guarding the king, I'm checking whoever's coming into the palace. I'm going to assume the person's right-handed. And so because of that, I'm going to check that left side because I know that's where they're going to keep their weapon at. Ehud was left-handed, so they didn't check that right side. So he was able to sneak in that dagger that he used to then kill the king, right? And able to draw it quickly because it was, again, on that side. He was left-handed. No one expected it. And so it's almost as if, that's really the minutia of details. But I just wanted to highlight that and why the Bible called out something such a small detail, right? And so as we keep reading down, we see a little bit where it says, it's almost like he goes back to tell the king he has a secret message for him, right? And I was actually thinking about starting the class with this question, but I was going to ask, does anyone in here like secrets? No? Y'all don't like secrets? Okay. Do y'all like when people tell y'all secrets? I said, does anybody like secrets? And everyone said no. I said, does anybody like when people tell them secrets? You don't like when people tell you secrets? Prefer not. Okay. I think it's funny because many people, honestly, a lot of times don't like secrets, but they love to be in the know. Everyone wants to be in the know. So that means everybody want to know a secret. Everyone wants to be in the know. We all agree on that part. But we don't like secrets. Right? So the same thing about true, right? The same reigns true today, reigned true back then. Again, the idea of cycles. The king himself, anything normal, people there, it's fine. It's like when he was delivering the taxes, all these people there, all the king's aides are there. But when it came down to a secret, Ehud said, hey, I got a secret I have to tell you. The first thing he said was, it says, leave us. That's what he told everyone else around him. All his aides, all his security, he wanted everybody gone. Why? Because He wants to know, but he don't want anybody else to know. He want to be the first to know, and the one to do with the information as he pleases. It's that idea of being in the know, right? Um, and so it says that they went up to the upper room, and that was Ehud's plan was to, okay, I got a secret, and then he says, telling the secret, everyone left and everything. And so now he got him where he wanted. He got him quiet. They in a room away from everybody else. They go into the upper room. He was like, okay, I'm not. If I'm at a party, there's a lot of people there. I said, hey, I got something I gotta tell you. You and your friend, y'all gonna leave, go outside, go somewhere quiet, go somewhere where it's just y'all two, essentially, to be told what's going on, so other people just don't know, right? Same thing we do, the same thing that was done. He took him to his private quarters. Cause think about it. It says in the King James version, it says took him to the sunroom or the parlor. In the NIV version, it says they took him to the upper room. Essentially, it was his private quarters, and something that only the king has access to. No one else is there. His aides don't have access to unless he invites them in. Also, we talked about the text mentioned. Oh, this was the sunroom parlor or something like that. And so essentially what this is if you think about it, we are in, what's the time period is? It says 1316 BC. Really, it should say before air conditioning, but before AC, because there's no air conditioning here. So you are in in Israel, which is the desert, in the summertime. Is they bringing taxes that normally happens around the harvest. After the harvest is done, everybody got their money. That's when they tax money come in, basically, right? Everybody got their little bit of money. Now the king gonna want his taxes. So this is the hottest part of the year as well, but there's no air conditioning. So you trying to tell me a secret? I'm a king. Okay, come to my sunroom, up in the upper room, probably north facing, all the shadows and things like that to keep it cool. Basically that's where they are. And when he's there, of course the king ate it up. He tells him, he commanded all his aides to leave the room, and it's just him and Ehud there because he's trying to get the news dropped to him, or the tea is what they call it nowadays, right? So they're there in the summer parlor. That's what it's called. No AC. It's secluded away from everybody as well because it's the king's quarters. Kings like privacy, right? And upon hearing the news, he stood up. They don't say why he stood up. He's like, I have a message from God. He don't say what the message is yet. The king just stands up. The text called out. They weren't sure if it was because he was either standing up in reverence to God. I know sometimes we stand up in church because of the Bible. When the Bible's being read, we'll stand up because it's God's word. In reverence, we'll stand up. It could have been that also if you having a conversation, if one person's standing, I'm going to stand. I don't sit down. I stand up myself because you never know what that person's going to do, right? It's a defense mechanism. People naturally stand up when it's being spoken to. So that's another thing of why he could have stood up. It's not said. This is speculations here. And then also it could have been because it could have been the tone of voice that Ehud used. Like, I got a message for you. Different ways you could say that. You can think of a way that make you like alarmed, like, oh, something's about to happen to me, right? And so the king stood up. As soon as he stands up, I told y'all the left hand side is fastest. Boom, bam, he stabs him. Didn't even recognize he was stabbed. They said in the Bible, or the text at least, it was so quick. The king didn't recognize what had happened, didn't have time to even yell out for help. Essentially, and Ehud just left, right? He left, locked the door, and then walked away. His aides thinking, they come in, trying to, don't hear an answer, like, oh, he must be going to the bathroom. It says covering his feet. That's just another way of saying going to the bathroom. And so they, left him, gave him some time to do whatever he's doing. Might be, who knows, right? And so the aides then returned, but they waited, and they eventually did come back because you would think, oh, they got the message, he's not there, he's not answering it, leave him alone. But no, it's like they started feeling like something's wrong. It's their job to aid to this man. So it makes sense that they would come back and check on him. And so, let me stop though. Anyone have any questions? I know I've been moving. Okay. But yeah, the aides didn't return until so much time had passed that they became worried, because if they aren't doing, they're caught not doing their job, they on break, and their break going a little long, they worried at this point, okay, now my job is at risk, or my life is at risk, because remember, if you ain't doing your job then, you a king aide, you might get killed. And so, the aides finally go and check, and they find, oh, dang, the king done been killed, right? Um, and really, I know preparing this lesson, shoot, even as I'm over here teaching it, it's like I had to almost calm myself down, because again, the Old Testament gets real action packed. It's almost like watching a movie and whatnot. At least this passage was as well. But the really point that's being made here is that at so many places this story could have fallen apart. So many places it could have gone wrong. An aide could have never left. They could have been too late, or they could have just lingered around. That would have foiled his plan, because think about it. He used a knife, but when the knife went in, it says that it got stuck because he was so fat, right? Or so big, right? No, I ain't. No, that's what it said in the text. Not because I said that. I'm reading the word. But that's another small detail that was called out, right? They did call out his size because it led to show that, say if he was a skinny man, right, and he pulled the blade back out, now he got blood on his hands, and you can't, how you gonna wipe it? No sinks, they ain't got running water the same way we do here. Where you gonna wash his hands at? Where you gonna wipe it out? He might get checked on his way out. They might be checking for weapons when he leave or something like that, right? So he didn't have it with him. But again, so many places the king could have fallen apart. The king could have not cared to hear the secret. He could have kept some aides with his security with him, even though he had a foreigner, literally, there giving him news. The knife could have came out. He could have got blood on his hands. He might not be able to lock the doors behind him. The other aides could have came in sooner. If they had came in sooner, he's still on the premises, they definitely would have got him, right? Or shot him with a bow and arrow, right? Because they didn't have pistols, but they did have ways of projectiles that can impact people. So again, so many places this thing could have fallen apart. But the thing is that whenever we do God's work in God's way, we'll be both guided as well as protected in order to fulfill His word, right? It says in the text, the parts of 25 to 29 that we didn't read. Was it 26 and to 28? Those two verses we didn't read. It says, while they waited, like they being the king's aides, while they waited, Ehud got away. He passed the stone images and escaped to Sariah. So essentially, he got across town. Like, no, it didn't sound any alarms. Essentially, that's again another place where it could have failed. But it was orchestrated so well because it was in God's divine plan for this all to happen, that nothing happened to Ehud, right? And because of that delay, when he was arriving to, it says Ephraim as well, because I think Sariah is in Ephraim. He went to the hill country of Ephraim and was able to blow a trumpet. He blew that trumpet. At this point, he is now summoning all of his soldiers, all his friends to come. It's time to go. We actually about to go attack the people who's been over us for 18 years. They've been in slavery for 18 years, y'all. So it's like they're going to hit them with a weak point. That's typically what you do. The same thing today is the same thing they did back then. Even in today's time, the U.S. government, the U.S. military, they try to strike in times of power transitions. That's why you think about, if anyone in here is military, right? Thank you for your service. But also, it's like the idea that the government will destabilize another country and then attack it, because it's best to attack. You have a higher chance of success in times of transition. The king is literally just died, so he's the one calling all the shots, calling all the kings, all the troops from different. You got the army, you got to call the navy, you got to call the marines. I'm sure it's another branch that I'm forgetting. Air Force, got to call all of them. They're only all going to listen to that one person. That one person's not there. You can't just have the Navy call the Air Force, say this needs to happen. No, they need clearance. Who's there to approve it, right? That's the person that's not there. So at this point, the best time to attack is now. Ehud runs back to Ephraim, sounds the alarm. Now all the soldiers are coming together, and they are going to strike to try to capture or to take down Moab. And so, again, that same tactic that's used today was used back then, and they actually won, right? It shows that they killed over 10,000 Moabites, and well, Moabite soldiers. And this isn't just their ordinary infantry, the ones who just enlisted, right? No, these are their Navy SEALs. It says that these are men of valor, men who were battle tested. That's what that means. Men who have been through thick and thin and all situations, but they were still able to overcome because again they had God's on their side. God gave them into their hand. I think it's the way they describe it in the Bible a lot of times. God has given this country into our hand. So yeah. In closing, I really want to say, like, really, this lesson itself, again, it was very action packed. But it's a reminder how God will show up in our lives when we do sincerely cry out to Him and obey Him. Right. That was the first step that even triggered any of this going into action. Before I start closing that lesson, ask, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So yeah, and so yeah, God will show up in our lives when we sincerely cry out to Him and obey His words. Also, when we face crisis in our lives, God will raise special people in our life to come help us. And so just remember that one piece, because the next piece I'm going to say is that it's actually tied into it, right? So God will even go the extra mile of planning, so that most times when that person that does come to help, a lot of times they've already been in our life, right? So we're talking about Ehud right now. Ehud wasn't like David. He wasn't born, like David was very young when he, killed Goliath, things like that. They were in slavery 18 years, right? Ehud was not 18 years old when he was going to take over and decide to kill the Moabite king. The reason I say this is only because he is someone who was previously part of the freedom, was then enslaved, and now trying to get it back, get that freedom back, right? When I'm saying that God will choose people in our lives long before we even encounter the crisis that will actually bring us out of the crisis, what I was saying, because that's just how His overall supernatural way of planning works a lot of times. Yeah, so pretty much before we even encounter the crisis, the person that's there to get us out the crisis is already in our life. We just don't know it until the time comes for it to happen, for His will to be done. That's just another testament of how much God does love us. And what I want to do now that I went through the majority of, or actually all of the text for the course or for today's lesson, what I want to do is read through the practical points, just a quick synopsis of everything that was pretty much covered in today's lesson. Pretty much it says the practical point number 1, in His mercy, God answers the cries of His children just at the right time. God's empowerment does not preclude our proper preparation. It's not wise to let curiosity override sound judgment. That was a major point in the story where it could have easily, if the king had been thinking straight with his right head, not trying to just get gossip, right, not trying to get the tea, not trying to be nosy, not trying to be in the know all the time, then he would have never been killed. This would have never transpired, a lot of these events, right? He would have had his guard still there with him. They would have checked Ehud's whole body, not just one side of the body, being lazy on it, right? God's message to man is not always a positive one as well, because Ehud did have a message from God. It was just the message was, oh, Eglon, you're no longer going to live because your reign is over with. My children have been punished enough, because God does use people to punish other people for not following what they're supposed to be doing what they're supposed to do, right? As a consequence. A lot of times it's called divine discipline. The Moabites was only able to take over Israel ever was because the Israelites were not doing what they were supposed to do. They was not following the law, statute, and commandments, because 40 years had passed. That was the beginning of the lesson when I said they had time to forget everything that their parents had learned and taught, or miracles even seen. Same reason they spent 40 years in the not same reason, but one of the reasons they was 40 years in the wilderness. Entire generation had passed. The ones that was not doing what they were supposed to, they was like, God was like, you're not even gonna see the promised land. I'm waiting for another generation to come, and then y'all will see the promised land. So that's what happened. Okay, 5. The wise person plans ahead, right? So Ehud, he definitely planned ahead on this. he made that dagger. I forget what verse he made the dagger in, but essentially, this is an entire plan that he had in order for it to work as smoothly as it did, as well as God was in the plans, of course. Project Point 6 says God rules over the choices of even unrighteous people. So that idea of hardening someone's heart, of making them choose the unwise decision of, oh, let me see what's this all about. Let me tell everybody to go away. God was definitely a part of that, right? And also, Project Point 7 is one of my favorite ones. Is with God, nothing is impossible. So definitely a powerful lesson, an action-packed lesson. It's so much action you can lose the lesson, in my opinion. You had a question? Oh, sorry. So with that, I definitely wanted to, well, I was about to say I want to thank y'all. Well, actually, I do want to thank y'all, staying through Sunday School 1, or coming to Sunday School. And I guess I'll do another chance for questions before I close us out, or any comments that anyone wants to leave on today's lesson. Because I know it's 10:16. It's a little early. It's still kind of a lot early, but it was. I know I talk fast. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. That idea a lot can change within 40 years as well, right? And also, I'm glad you said that about your blessing, like things you're praying for, because a lot of times we talk about how forgetful people are. Sometimes we forget our own prayers as well. And a lot of times we look around, the blessings that we prayed for, things that we prayed for have already come to light, but we just hadn't seen it or recognized it because we've been so caught up in just living life and getting by that we haven't even sat to recognize, wait, this is something I prayed for when I was, I'm 27 now, so I'll say maybe when I was 10, or maybe when, I don't know, right? I don't know how long ago it was, but basically what I'm saying is it will come back around. You sometimes forget. Shoot, I know I forget. So yeah, definitely got to be patient because things can come or will come with time as well. Any other points or any other question statements anyone want to add to class? Y'all wild today. All right, I'll close this out in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for today's lesson. Allow it to rest within us. Allow us to recognize when it is you have plans for our lives as well as working in our life. Thank you for our family and friends and those just in our lives, those who have stepped up and in the leadership role, and we just haven't noticed it, or they've done what you would have them to do in order for your will to be done, Lord. So thank you, Father, again for today's lesson, and bless those who are without, and bless those who are still coming to church as well. Your son Jesus' name, pray.